Well, thank you for tuning back in for our figurative language series. And so today we are going to cover 3 additional types of figures of speech. We will talk about alliteration, we will discuss idioms, and we will also discuss oxymorons. And so for me, it's just really important that you know why I'm covering so many types of figurative language, because I want students to know that you need to go beyond the similes and the metaphors. They are great. I'm not implying that they are not. But there are so many other types of figurative language devices that you can use in your writing, and I just really want to give you exposure to all of those. So what is the purpose of figurative language? I like to think of it honestly as like adding a little bit of salt to your food. It spices up your writing, it gives it a little bit of flavor, and it forces the reader to figure out what the author is trying to convey without using literal meaning. And so these figurative language devices allow the writer to draw comparisons in a variety of ways. So let's jump right into it. So for the first figurative language device that we will cover, it is alliteration. So what is alliteration? Alliteration is the repetition of the same beginning consonant sounds of words that are closely connected in either the sentence or the passage. Let's take a look at an example. So for our first example of alliteration, I am going to use my lizard. Yes, Spartacus was introduced in my intro and he's back again for a feature. So here is an example of alliteration. Lizards live long lives. The same beginning consonant sound that we hear is the sound oo for the letter L. Our next example of alliteration, I have decided to bring out our hamster Rex. And so I am going to create an alliteration using the consonant sound for the letter H. So here I go. Healthy hamsters hide happily. So for our next example of a figurative language device, we have idioms. Now, some might think that idioms and hyperboles are the same, but they're really not. So to refresh your memory, a hyperbole is an extreme over-exaggeration. Remember, I'm so hungry, I can eat a horse. Now, an idiom is a common expression used in our English language that upon hearing it the first time, it actually doesn't make any sense, but figuratively, it has meaning. So what exactly am I talking about? Let's look at a few examples. Example number 1, break a leg. Literally, break a leg is not positive, but figuratively, it actually means good luck. Another example that we have, a dime a dozen. Well, what does that really mean? A dime a dozen? Okay, a dozen is 12, but what is the meaning behind all of this? Well, a dime a dozen figuratively means that something's actually quite common. Another example that we have, and I'm sure you've heard of this one, a blessing in disguise. I know personally, I want my blessings to run me down, run me over. I really don't want it in disguise. But oftentimes, in hindsight, something that you perceive to be negative and that you may not have understanding about, when you think about it, it's like that was a blessing in disguise. And so idioms are these common expressions that we use that when you hear it the first time, it may not resonate and make any sense, but figuratively, it actually has a lot of meaning. For our last example, we have oxymoron. Well, what is an oxymoron? An oxymoron is when contradictory terms are paired together. And so let's go over a few examples. Have you ever heard of jumbo shrimp? They're quite tasty, but have you ever heard of jumbo shrimp? Shrimp would imply small, jumbo implies large, yet when they're put together, it makes sense. Another one, bittersweet. Okay, bitter is tart, sweet is not, but you put them together and yet it makes sense. This one is hilarious to me. Awfully good. Awful implies bad, which is completely opposite of good. But you put it together, awfully good, and yet it still makes sense. And then last, I know you've heard of this one for sure. Pretty ugly. For example, that house is pretty ugly. You hear pretty and then you hear ugly. Yet when you put it together, you know exactly what the speaker is saying. And so I thank you for tuning in to our third video on figurative language. And I hope that you've enjoyed it and that you've learned a lot. Thank you. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and I promise to reply. Stay tuned.